Welcome to the Business Vitality Podcast. My name is Catherine Cantey. I am the host and an executive coach. I work with teams, individuals, and leaders to help create measured leadership change. We do that using practical applications, and our clients are creating 100% measured results as seen by those around them. Not necessarily what I think or what they think, but what the other people are seeing. And they are being recognized for the hard work that they're doing. If you're interested in learning more about some of the work that we're doing, you can learn more at catherinecantey.com. I would love for you to subscribe to this show, to Business Vitality. This is my way to continue to pay it forward and share business best practices. Stay tuned and listen to the interview. Thanks for being here. Peter Compo, you are the author of The Emergent Approach to Strategy, found on the web at emergentapproach.com, also at Amazon. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good to be here.
So tell me, Peter, let's talk about the book, The Emergent Approach to Strategy. Can you just kind of give me, is it possible to kind of talk high level about strategy?
Yeah,
in your book?
I can talk high level about what the book is trying to say about strategy for sure.
I like it.
It's really in two parts. And the first half of the book is a theory of strategy, a new theory of strategy, and what that implies for design, what it implies for execution, what it implies for strategy tests. And then the second half of the book is pure practice. And it is a set of not only design principles, but an overall, you might say, strategy, an overall approach to how to create strategy. And the two parts of the book are obviously linked in that the practice in part two uses the new theory in part one. Now, everything in part two is not new. I try my best to keep all that is traditional that can be applied and that still makes sense, but there's a lot of modifications.
Can you talk about, well, I have a question first. When you broke down the book into two different areas, was there one that was just easier to flow and easier to write and more fun?
That's a great question. Writing this was not easy for me. I'm not an author. I was never a writer. I think actually maybe the practice was a little easier because the theory had to be very, everything had to be tied up. It had to be very tight. It had to be very consistent, and language had to be right. And that's very hard in the strategy area because there's so much different language. There's so much confusion about what all the words mean that we use all the time. What does a strategy mean? How is it defined? I have a list of 70, on the website, I have a list of 75 definitions. And yeah, you can boil them down to 8 or 9 or so, but even the top strategy people out there that you listen to all the time don't have the same definitions of terminology and definitions of strategy. So I think the theory was a little harder, yes.
Yeah, consistency is key with communication. I feel like we've learned that, or at least that's something that I've learned. And if we're not consistent with, what is strategy and what's the theory of it, makes it hard to execute. It makes it hard, within an organization just to communicate down the levels or up the levels, whichever way you're positioned. If it's not consistent and clear, it makes it hard. And that can be tricky.
Could I say that's a really important point, and it's working in two places. Not only do corporations and businesses and nonprofits, any organization, have difficulty with common language. What the hell do we mean by we're going to grow and so profitably and with excellence? Not only do corporations have the problem, but the strategy industry, the academic consultants, that whole complex has an enormous difficulty with language. Words are thrown around so carelessly, in a sense. And we were talking briefly before we went on the air about Clayton Christensen and how he even had to publish a paper in 2015 saying, stop just using the word, his famous word. Oh my God, I'm missing it. Come on, help me. Disruption.
Disruption, yeah.
Stop using the word disruption for any case you want it. You want for any time a business does better than another business, or any time a product does better than another product. That's not what it means. It has a very specific technical meaning. And so there's carelessness everywhere. And the fact that most people who write about strategies have a consulting business and, are marketing at the same time. This is very tricky. And so it's a problem for not only leaders and corporations, it's a problem for the whole strategy academic, body of knowledge itself.
Yeah, I've loved the conversation we had before. I should probably just start taping them when, we jump in, because I feel like sometimes there's always gold in that too. That reminds me, when you talk about how Clayton argued and shared, not everything is a disruption. I was out at a board planning session and sitting with the directors, and they asked for me to facilitate this session. And I challenged with the way they were thinking in regards to not everything is a disruption. And what we're doing is just the same thing that we've always been doing, but maybe we're going to refine the customer experience a little bit. We're going to clarify some communication processes that we're going to have internally. This is not disruptive stuff. This is not creating the iPhone that's never been created before. This is not, creating something that's never been around before. And it shouldn't be disturbing to hear that there's a difference in definitions. That there's just not that much disruption taking place. We can all refine it and just better communicate. I'm going to pause for a minute and just I feel like you have some thoughts that maybe you want to share.
Well, I mean, I think this is right. Words like disruption and transformation excellence get thrown around so much that they completely lose their meaning. Christensen made a great discovery and developed a whole theory of how important it is, disruption, but it doesn't apply in every case, hardly at all, where low value, low performance, low cost products come in early and then work their ways up. We saw this at DuPont. We never got beat up by a better product, almost never got beat up by a better product. It was always products that were good enough to start taking share. And this is a very, very important model. Yet 90% of what I see where the word disruption is used is nothing like that. It's just, we're going to be better. We're going to transform. We're going to be better. What does it mean? It doesn't mean anything.
When you shared your DuPont background before we hit record, I have to also wanted to share with you that the small town that I live in South Carolina was transformed by DuPont. It brought in an incredible amount of jobs. It brought in income and disposable spending and just amazing opportunities for this area. So DuPont, was able to give. And as a result of that, our community was impacted in a favorable way, like many other communities, small communities around the country and beyond. So you obviously have a lot of background with DuPont. Do you mind just talking about how some of that work applied into your thinking and the work that you're doing now?
Yes. Yeah. And yes, DuPont, one of the great companies in history. It's now been broken up into smaller pieces, and there's a new DuPont that's still a great company, of course. But what you talked about was the truly transformational new products and new capability that DuPont put in towns all over the country and now overseas and then overseas. I spent 25 years at DuPont in a wide variety of leadership positions. I was trained as a PhD chemical engineer and as a musician. And I went to DuPont, and from a strategy point of view, I had always been interested in how innovation occurs. and how creativity occurs and how people did what they did, like the great musicians that I knew about first, and then the great scientists that I knew about in when I studied, engineering and physical science. When I got into DuPont, I was disappointed in how strategy was done and how it was considered. And frankly, I learned, and I kind of knew right away because of the army of consultants that were always brought into the company, that the outside world wasn't much different. And what I saw, and I now see this almost everywhere, is that strategies are long lists of supposedly good things to do, with a big vision on top of it and goals and maybe some plans with some names and dates and that kind of thing, but nothing that really gave insight, nothing that gave real-time guidance for making decisions as you walk down the road. They were platitudes in many ways. They were cliches sometimes, and just, goals, sub-goals. I was disappointed with that. And I do believe that one of the reasons why DuPont couldn't survive after 200 years and reinvent itself again was in part because that we really didn't have strategy methods that would have been good enough. And I started making notes, I started writing, and over time I would start developing my ideas in a more concrete way, and I would use them in the company, and many people were very interested in them. But at some point I had to go full time and work on it on my own to get it right, because it was such a large task. It was a little bit of a crazy thing to do as a lone person, working in his music studio, creating a book on strategy. Most of the books like this were created by people in big consultant houses or big academic departments. But I think it's also known that sometimes the new ideas come from unusual places as well. So
Isn't that, go ahead.
please go.
No, I was going to comment that, isn't that where the great disruption comes from, is from that small player who has, starts out with an MVP, minimal viable product solution idea, test it small. It's totally understated. Nobody even, oh man, I mean, what could Peter know, not a big deal. And then here you come out of a music studio. Nobody would ever think this. And what if that's just the next great thing?
It can happen that way. And of course, I believe it's happened in my situation. I think I'm saying something different. Of course, I use the same words in many cases, and that's a problem because everybody's so confused by all the noise of the words. You go on LinkedIn, you go on Medium, you read the business journals, and everybody's just using the same words in different ways without definition. It's a tricky area, but I decided I had to write it down. I decided I had to get it out there, and I'll spend my time getting people to understand it as best I can. And hopefully they can move away from the long lists of platitudes and goals and cliches and start to get something that's really tough and really difficult, because strategy is very difficult. There's no recipe. You cannot buy the latest book that says, here's how you do it in 5 steps or 10 steps. This is the answer. No, it doesn't work like that. And I don't give any strategy advice in my book. There's no advice about what markets you should be in, what products, what anything. It's a technique, it's an approach and a discipline so that you can find your own reality, so you can find your own strategy.
I think discipline is the key word in there, because so many people get down the road, they change their mind, they're not committed, they hit a bump in the road. But that discipline of continuing to show up day in and day out and making adjustments allows for that success. And I'm curious to hear from you. You're doing some consulting work with businesses that are out there in regards to strategy. Do you have a particular success case that you're loving working with this individual or this company, this line that maybe you can share?
Well, I'd like to share. Well, I had several situations in DuPont that were really successful. And I'd like to mention that one thing that was interesting was the operations organizations, manufacturing and supply chain, had a much greater interest than most of the business leaders. And the reason was, well, two reasons. Most business leaders think they know all about strategy already, so no one's going to tell them anything, right? If only my people would execute, everything would be great. It's all because my people don't execute. All right, what's execution? Okay, we'll get into that. That's another question. But the manufacturing organization, operations organization, were, in my view, and many said this, kind of desperate from guidance from the businesses. And all they got was lists of goals. Meet these objectives. Well, which products are most important? Which customers are most important? Which technology should we develop? Should we give line time to R&D, or should we give line time to these customers? What kind of people should we hire? Where are we going? What should we keep investing in the U.S. plant, or should we add to the Chinese plant? They were not getting direction on these kinds of things, and we had several cases where we were able to bring order by bringing the business side and the manufacturing, the operations side together on the same page, and start to get common language and to just dump all the lists of goals. Sometimes the goals would go on for 6-7 pages.
Mm-hmm.
And just stop, just get rid of it all. Articulate your goals clearly. 1 goal, 2 goals. And now what's in the way? The bottleneck is a big question. And then what kind of policies or rules will bring these organizations together? I'm extraordinarily simplifying it, but the point I'm trying to make is that one of the biggest successes in DuPont was working with manufacturing people because they were hungry for direction from the business. And some of the best successes that resulted is where we ended up doing segmentation type work, where the business had to make decisions. They had to face up to making choices between different customers, different product developments, different regions and markets. And it could be hard and difficult, very painful to let go of a customer that was good for you 5-10 years ago and maybe isn't as good anymore, but that's who got you there. Very hard to let go. Real strategy means tough trade-offs. Let me go to, we were talking a little bit about a program I'm involved with. El Sistema is a worldwide program that brings music every day after school, all afternoon, and then sometimes, and then summer programs as well for at-risk kids. And it's a beautiful situation. They get homework, they get homework time and music lessons and drumming lessons and singing and all kinds of things. And it's really a wonderful program. Started in Venezuela in the 70s and has become worldwide. It's called El Sistema. And some programs are called El Sistema influenced or inspired programs. I mean, there's 140 in the US now. So I got involved with this program, and it was identical to a DuPont business in that there were pages and pages of strategic priorities. How are you going to have 35 strategic priorities? Well, we did the same thing, and they're really good people, and they had an inkling that this was not strategy and this didn't make sense. And they made some very, very tough decisions about what to stop doing, what to keep doing, driven by some principles and some basic strategic principles. So it's interesting that some of the best impact was on manufacturing organizations desperate from information from businesses, and from a nonprofit that would seem as different from a business, a manufacturing business in the U.S. as it could be,
I think it's funny. I've met with so many clients over the years, and they always think, I'm unique. My business is unique. Nobody else does it anyway like I do. You need to sit down and totally relearn everything because I'm totally different. and I hate to break it to them, but there's always going to be some similarities in there. And, you try to have a little compassion and like, oh yeah, yeah, totally unique. Nobody else does it this way. And yet there's always some similarities in there. So it's always fun to see it, because I also think you can share so many best practices from somebody who's not in the same industry and be able to leverage that to be able to grow your own business in a unique way.
But this is a really good point. Yes, every business has some uniqueness.
Mhm.
Every nonprofit, every government, every military has things that make them unique. But from systems theory, from complex adaptive systems theory and the theories of emergence, what we know is that there are certain commonalities in trying to make change and innovate and get better, right? There are certain basic fundamental principles that apply. What's not good is if we turn those principles into very specific advice. Here, do this, go to this market, go to this, have products that look like this, hire people like this. That probably is not going to be good advice unless the consultant is really clued into what the reality is there. But what I'm trying to do, and I think others, is give guidance that could apply to anyone, but you have to make it your own. You have to find your own reality in it. So for example, one of the things that is probably more unique to my work, Richard Rummel, very important strategist, also focuses on this, but no matter who you are or what you're trying to do, whether you're trying to write music, whether you're trying to discover a scientific theory or learn about something in science, or whether you're a business or a government, to find a strategy, you have to figure out what's in the way of getting the. And every system in the world is constrained, or else it would just produce infinite amounts of whatever you want. And this is a fundamental principle that would apply to any endeavor in the world. If you want to find a strategy policy that will help give guidance to the organization, you've got to build it around the bottleneck, what's in the way. Or else you end up writing long lists of good things to do because everything matters. But everything doesn't matter. Solving what's in the way is what matters.
Yeah. Closing those gaps, smoothing it out, tailoring it to the individual so they can understand it. For folks that are just kind of like, okay, I agree. A strategy is tricky. You mentioned something earlier, and I think it really breaks it down to some simplicity. And I guess maybe it's too obvious to talk about it, but I want to get your opinion on this. You mentioned something around there's some commonality around creating change. So there's people that listen and they're like, yeah, I agree. I need a strategy. I need to create change. But what are some of these small things that I can start doing now? Like when I hang up this podcast and stop listening, put my earbuds down, because when we're in it, we don't always see it.
Very
So
hard.
do you mind talking about, what are some of those commonalities to create change, and what are some of those kind of low hanging fruit ideas that maybe can get somebody unstuck?
It's a great question, and we were just touching on it. My book kind of gives a full blast version that a corporation would need, but if you were looking to start on a smaller scale, and it's actually even a good way to start for a large organization, is just start with the three things we were talking about. Can you articulate what your goal, what your aspiration is without jargon? Can you articulate it very clearly and get other people to say, I understand what that means? And then, and you put this on just one piece of paper. What's in the way? What's the bottleneck? And this can be a lot of different things. It could be money and resources and assets. It could be complexity, confusion. It can be a lack of people. It can be you don't have the right products or the right services to achieve the aspiration you want, so on and so forth. It can be a lot of different categories. It can be confusion. Then say, what's a strategy policy? What's a strategy rule that could help us get around that bottleneck, lessen that bottleneck? I use a very simple example in my book, a made-up example of launching a bike shop that would apply to a very simple organization, right? And I point out that there's a guy who, or a gal, you don't know whether it's a guy or a gal. Of course, I use guy gender-free. A guy who wants to start a bike shop, but let's say it's a he. He knows everything about bikes, but he doesn't know anything about business, right? So, and he doesn't have any money or anything like that. So what's his bottleneck? What does he have to bust? He has to bust the fact that this is very confusing and that all the national bike makers will come solve it for him by bringing in their brands and their collateral and their advertising and their store displays. And he says, I don't want to do it. I want to keep my individuality. So what's the bottleneck to doing this? It's very complicated and there's so much to do. And I'm new to this idea of doing business. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do everything my way, as simple as possible. I'll never spend a penny on anything that's not in the service of fixing bikes and bringing good products to my customers. And this became the strategy. Very, very simple. Called it My Thing strategy. I'll collect all the best things I can find. I'm not going to get stuck with any one supplier, but the way I'm going to make it work is super simplicity. I'm not even going to paint the walls. I'm going to buy some furniture from IKEA for displays. I'm going to let my tech guy play music in the back. I won't even have a phone. I'll just have cell phones and a little square reader on the bottom of the phone. It all comes from understanding what's in the way. That's the number one thing that anybody can do. Don't start writing down everything that could possibly be important. Don't write down a list. I need a great advertising. I need great products. I need great accessories. I need to have a great store with a great sign and great insight and great collateral and a great website and all kinds of great advertising campaigns and so forth. And I'm going to do all of these. This is the mentality of so many strategy approaches, and then we're going to measure our progress against all of them in a balanced scorecard. No, you haven't asked what's really in the way. What's the thing keeping us from the first level of success that we want to get? So that's my advice for how to start. All right. Aspiration, bottleneck, strategy rule. Start working that triad. And then when you need more deeper thought, you can dig into other things from other people and from my book and so forth. But that's the place to start. And it sounds trivial. It sounds trivial. It's really hard to do. It's really hard to do.
I think it is extremely hard to do. I'm just thinking about a number of scenarios in my head right now, and it's not always that easy to simplify it to what truly is in the way and how do you articulate it, and then how do you attack it. It's just not that easy. And you mentioned earlier before we started talking that you've got a number of resources on your website. Do you mind talking about those a little bit and sharing those with us?
Yeah, there's a few things on the website. The first is I didn't use traditional appendices in the book. I put them online instead so that I can improve them and change them over time. So there's all kinds of book supplements to the chapters. I mentioned one before, 75 definitions of strategy in chapter 1 I have in the book supplement online. The second is I have 5 new tests of strategy called a new set of tests called the 5 disqualifiers. You can find some examples of those there that aren't in the book, but there's a detailed chapter 8 in the book on the 5 disqualifiers, which are tests that are much less subjective. But then relating to getting started, there are what I call the 5 task sets. And this is a guidebook, a little guidebook to using the practice of the emergent approach. And this is a section on the website. All you need is an email and a password to get in. And it goes not in a recipe form, but in a design principle form, where you do an initial draft of what we just talked about, your little framework, and it can be bigger or smaller. And then you work it, you evolve it, you beat it up, you suffer with it until it starts to emerge, until the picture starts to emerge. And one thing I say is that the difference between a recipe and an emergent approach is like solving a puzzle versus following a recipe. And you don't know what the picture's going to be yet because you don't have a box with the picture on top. You don't have a clear definition of where the puzzle begins and ends. You'll never have all the pieces. Sometimes the pieces change shape, the whole schmear. It's like a dynamic puzzle. Anyway, this 5 task sets that are online are design principles and this running example of a bike shop to show how you would apply these design principles to create a strategy framework.
I think that's fantastic.
There's also in there some thoughts on how to design teams for a good strategy development. Little things like, don't be so quick to use Pareto's law, the 80-20 rule and things like that. So I think people could get a lot out of that guidebook, and then they can refer back to the book when they need a more detailed explanation of what's behind the approach.
Fantastic. I can't help but notice all your musical instrument support systems, everything in the background. Talk about that for a minute. I can't help but notice.
Yeah, I grew up in a musical family. My parents were both musicians, but went back generations in New York, and that's pretty much all I did early in life. But then, for various reasons that we can't get into, I kind of had to go to school. And if you keep going to school, eventually they give you degrees. And I just kept going and going. And kind of when I was 30 years old, I finished my engineering doctorate and went to work for DuPont. But I never gave up the music, and I've always written. I have a music site on YouTube. It's called Peter Compo Music, and it's kind of a mix of electronica and what you would call classical music as well. And it's just a big part of my life that I don't have enough time for and never did, but I won't, I'll never give it up completely. So it's just the background, I suppose, for what I do.
I think it complements you, and it creates some balance and a little bit of an outlet to be able to keep your brain going with all that creativeness that you're creating right now. I mean, it's creative in business, creative in music.
I think it's more actually my musical background gave me something further. It's that I don't think I would have seen how innovation and creativity has to be so disciplined. And this is something I do get into that we didn't talk about in the theory, but jazz, my father was a jazz musician, jazz is held up as like this great example, this exemplar of what innovation and creativity is all about, right? Especially jazz improvisation. And when I got into the corporate world and I would hear this, they would always make it sound like, well, that's just freedom. You just got to set yourself free, and oh, the problem with business people is they don't set themselves free and therefore they're not creative. Well, this is complete bullshit. The people who are just free in music just play cliches. The people who do great improvisation and great composition and really create something new and innovative have enormous discipline. The problem is you can't see it. It's deep. It's in a different language. They might not even know what the discipline was, or that they couldn't tell you, but I knew it was there. And I think that, ironically, seeing the discipline in music, that music is designed, not just comes from the sky, allowed me to see how much discipline was a part of business and technology and science, the creativity of business, technology, and science. But it has to be at a lower level. It's a different way of thinking about it. And chapter 2 of the book does a bit of a deep dive into how that looks and why emergence works as it does, and why the designs of strategy are disciplined.
Peter, if someone wanted to reach out to you, learn more, connect with you, what is the best way to do that?
They can hit me up on my website or LinkedIn. I post often on LinkedIn, and you can see a lot of these things we've talked about in there, and little posts, and all my contact information is there. You can go to info@emergentapproach.com as well. So easy to get in touch with me.
I really appreciate your time and sharing all of these insights and stories. It makes it fun to continue to learn and connect. Peter Compo, you are the author of The Emergent Approach to Strategy, found on the web at emergentapproach.com, also found on Amazon. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's been great to talk with you, Catherine.
Thanks for listening to the episode. If you like it, please subscribe, share this episode or this show with other people around you. The greatest form of a compliment is a referral. I really appreciate them. And if you think that you want to learn more about some of the work we're doing, I encourage you to reach out to CatherineCantey.com. You can schedule a call or just continue to read articles and information that we post out there. Thank you so much for being here.